folks. I'm just verifying, that we are actually on. Yeah, I think we're on YouTube, and I cannot tell you people how different my life is going to be not stressing about the blue go live button. Because as those of you who have been long time in lieu of fun watchers and are not new to this in the form of dog shirt TV, the blue go live button on YouTube was one of the principal sources of anxiety in my life. And I have been told by a number of people with anxiety that shows that I am uh, a completely non-anxious person, if that can be true. But I'm just telling you, nothing causes me anxiety like that blue go live button on Twitter, on YouTube, and the fact that it is no longer a part of my life, and that when I press go live on Riverside, it just goes live. And I mean, that's got to be something on the order of, the invention of fire, the discovery of, I don't know. I don't know what to compare it to, but in my life, it's big. So, look, folks, it is 6:02 p.m., Monday, September 9th. That means it is one day before the presidential debate, 2 days before, I think, the 23rd anniversary of 9/11, 3 days before the anniversary of something that happened on September 12th, and, something like 60 days before the either apocalypse or the salvation from it. All of which is a long way to say we're not really allowed to have fun anymore yet. But we are allowed to have one of my new favorite people on the show. And I'm going to give an appropriate introduction to Katie momentarily. But before I do, I want to talk about something just grotesquely satisfying that happened yesterday. And this, of course, has to do with the Russian propensity to destroy sunflowers. The Russians, once again, or I should say, to be precise, a random crazy person with no connection whatsoever to the Russian embassy, who was in no way motivated by anything. And I will be the first to admit I cannot prove any of that this person was like the last person and the one before that and the people who rip down posters staring at my cameras while they tear down posters. And they are all unconnected to the building across the street. It's just that block of Wisconsin Avenue in front of the embassy has a mysterious effect on homeless people that have nothing to do with Russia, Ukraine, or any Eastern European politics. It turns them into destructive maniacs who want to rip up symbols of Ukrainian nationalism. So that happened the other day. And Connor, keeper of the sunflower garden, distress called me and said, we need to replant them. And that reminded me of certain other Russian atrocities, less important, that had happened that week, including Poltava and Lviv and the serial bombing of Kharkiv that's been going on for months, and the massive bombardments in Kiev this week. And so I thought we should do the first ever combined arms operation: sunflowers and two lasers, one assigned to the text and one, my new darling Lady Laser, assigned to the images, because Lady Laser, unlike Lord Laser, can project. Oh, we have somebody special showing up. Lady Laser Hello, Kate Klonick, Lady Laser herself.
Hi, Ben Wittes and Genevieve. Who's Lady Laser?
Lady Laser, other than you,
Lord.
is the wife of Lord Laser. They were recently married in an Instagram nuptials, and they did their first operation together yesterday. And I want to show everybody what that operation looked like, because I was especially proud, I have to say, of my improved photography skills. And so we're just going to take a look at some of these images. And so this is, can you see this, guys?
Yes.
Oh, good. Okay. So this is, Lord Laser on the text, Lady Laser on the images. And this is, at 300 feet. You can see the traffic going by there, those beautiful streaks. This is, we did some writing on the walls, that we turned the Z spotlights into our own lettering. And the Russians were just flummoxed. I see. Oh, this is the other thing. Lord Laser cannot project in red on this building at that distance. Lady Laser, 3 times the power can. So I just felt, and of course, this for Katie, who, this is, you can't do this stuff before. So, all of which is a long way of saying, my impish
We haven't
side.
had fun. We haven't had fun for a long time.
Well, yeah, yesterday was a bit of fun. And
Yesterday was a bit of fun.
Yeah, it was a bit of fun, even though we're not allowed to have fun anymore. We scavenged some from the dregs of the sunflowers and the earth, and fun was had. So, first of all, I would like to propose a toast to the return of Kate Klonick to In Lieu of Fun / Dog Shirt TV. For those who don't know, Kate.
Hi, Katie. I don't think I know you. Nice to meet you.
We're going to introduce Katie in a moment.
Yeah, I know. Okay.
The first
I have an
few
empty
minutes
glass.
are always monologues.
It feels like a really bad omen. I know.
So
hold on.
For those who don't know, Kate is one of the 2 original founders of In Lieu of Fun. She's also living in France right now, which makes the whole doing this at 6 o'clock kind of psychotic.
This is going to last 15 minutes. This is water.
And so welcome back, Kate Klonick. Second item of business, Katie Shmatsina. It is not often. I've been racking my brain, 700-800 episodes or so of this show, trying to think of the last.
Oh my God, did I drop into the Katie Shmatsina episode? I saw this like, oh shit. Sorry, Katie. Oh my God, that's which Katie you are. Jesus. I was like, oh, there's like a really cool looking Katie. Good name.
Yeah. Well, the Katie in question is Katsiaryna.
Nice to meet you. Sorry. Okay, so now it just like clicked. Sorry,
I have racked my brain.
12:09 in the morning here.
Sorry. To try to figure out whether we have actually had an insurrectionist on the show before. And we've had some people who've been convicted of crimes. In fact, one of our regulars on the show, Dwayne Betts, does a lot of prison work, spent time incarcerated. So, but we're generally anti-insurrection on the show, having gone through the 2020 election cycle. And so I think it's a big step for us to welcome a convicted insurrectionist on the show. Katie was recently sentenced to 10 years in a Belarusian prison. And shortly before the sentencing, I just want to say, I heard her say on a podcast that she would be insulted if she got less than 10 years. And because all the cool kids were getting at least 10 years, and she would consider it an insult if she didn't get at least 10. And so I want to start by saying, are you satisfied with 10? Or do you feel like that was the bare minimum you should have gotten for respectability? And like, if you'd been really cool, you would have gotten more?
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Ben, for an amazing introduction. Well, I mean, there are like two dimensions to it. Like, one is I could be, I should mention the roughly 1,500 and more de facto political prisoners in Belarus, and it's no fun for them to be behind the bars, and then the repressions continue.
No, but you're here. You're safe. So for you, it's just like a question of status.
Yeah. So I think that's like the bare minimum, because the folks who are the key opposition figures, they got like 20. So I'm like,
and you're just like a think tank scholar. You're
exactly. So that's good enough.
All right. All right. So a little bit more about Katie. And I'm making fun of her when I call her an insurrectionist. What she actually is somebody whose job is very similar to mine. She's a think tank policy analyst. She's worked for a Belarusian think tank. She's worked for the German Marshall Fund. She's worked for the International Republican Institute, the a think tank or a democracy organization that's associated with the Republican Party in the United States. She is a writer and podcaster, and is the impresario behind the amazing podcast, which I'd love to refer you all to, In the Bunker with Darth Putin. Darth is an anonymous Twitter figure who does the podcast with a voice disguise. Katie, who's actually a political dissident, does it in her own name with her actual voice. So I just want to say, Darth, if you're listening, man up here. And she has recently been prosecuted in absentia in a long-running crazy case that just finished up and sentenced her to 10 years in prison. She is in the Washington area, safe, with with an asylum application pending that should be the most open and shut political asylum case in the history of political asylum cases. And she's funny, which is actually the most interesting thing about it, which is she has a genuine sense of humor about this awful set of experiences that have happened. So what are you drinking, Katie?
I'm having a martini, and now I'm experiencing anxiety, after all this introduction.
Yeah, don't pay any attention to him. He does this for everyone. Don't feel special.
Expectations high,
All right, let's get into it.
What's your favorite color?
I haven't decided, obviously. So.
Yeah, that's actually how I feel about favorite colors. I have like a small child now, so this is like, she's not even speaking. She's a complete idiot. But there's like, but yeah, I think that's good. But no, I'm serious. It's really cool to meet you. And I have read a lot about you from Ben's postings in various social media and things like that. And I saw that you were coming. And so it's very exciting to meet you. I just kind of, this is, it's always like a risk and kind of crazy coming on to talk about kind of any type of political dissident work on a public channel. So I appreciate you doing it. And it's really nice to meet you. So wait, so you're in DC. How did the sunflowers go today, Ben?
Oh, that was yesterday. They
Yeah,
are
sorry,
still
that was
they are
yesterday.
still alive today, and I'm not betting that they will make it through the week, because we were loud and aggressive yesterday, and so I assume that the Russians will kill them quickly. But it's the end of the season, and we thought we would go out with a bang, and so I am posting pictures of them every day that they survive, and
Can
that
I ask Katie a question, which is like, as a person who has lived in Eastern Europe and like in Belarus and like all of these places, like, what do you think? What is like, is there a translation to how the Russians decide to, like, when they do things like tear up like the sunflowers? It means most people aren't paying attention to the sunflowers anyways in the US, unfortunately. But like the negative press of tearing up the sunflowers that Ben brings to it, that other people bring to it, is like significant. Like, what is it that they're doing? Like, why are they doing that? Like, is there a genuine fear of what the West is doing? Even the Z's on the building. Like, why? Like, don't you think that at a certain point, like actually fighting Ben, like brings more attention
Kate's
to
saying
all of
here
it?
that I am. Why do they think I am a worthy adversary?
Yeah, so I think
Yes.
What's wrong with them that they do battle with me over posters and sunflowers and light games?
Yes.
Like, why am I able to drag them down?
Like,
so I think that
Genevieve is my former law student, so she's like recognizing the Socratic method here.
I think the Kremlin hates to be mocked at. Like that's the soft spot they have, really. Like they're okay with being afraid, or like they want to project the power, but when you're mocking them or challenging them in this sort of creative and funny way, that's in a way like the worst, because you obviously don't take them seriously. And it's I think that's in a way like part of the logic of Putin himself. And I mean, I'm not saying like that would be like an exaggeration to say that that's where his attempt to reassemble the lands for the Russian Empire is, like, what's the rationale behind it. But yeah, like in a way he hates Ukrainians so much, in a part because they were singing songs or like mocking the Russian imperialistic ambitions in a way, and that's driving this geopolitical fever.
Do
And
you
so does
see
the Russian embassy folks.
do you see any, well, I assume there are some, but do you see a lot of parallels in the use of humor to in our politics recently versus what's been going on and how people are trying to manage Putin?
I wouldn't compare it because these are like, I know well the authoritarian context,
Right.
and the lack of options, or like there are limited options what you can do or for how long, let's say, you can protest. Be it in Moscow or in Minsk, it would take like 2 minutes before the police will show up. Um, um, so I'm actually just trying to adjust to American politics and try to make sense of it. But I was here in 2015-16, and I can tell you that the next day after Trump was elected, I worked at the American Bar Association at the time, and the silence at the office, like everyone was so silent as if we were mourning, like
Yeah.
the death. So that was a very strong
No,
impression.
say more. What did that feel like? I mean, like, what was that like compared to an
I
authoritarian like regime after an election? I don't know. I have
oh,
no way of knowing.
I was impressed that we had a town hall meeting, and we were offered sort of an option to use another entrance at ABA premises if you don't want to see the officials, like the new officials, like portrait at the entrance. And for me, it sounded like very different because, like in Belarus, again, you cannot display, like show publicly or uh, your attitude towards the status quo, like if you're not happy with it. So that was different for sure.
So how is I think with Putin, there is an understanding that's quite widespread among a lot of people that mockery is an effective way to address the Russian regime. So your partner in the podcast is his whole persona is and he's actually a very serious analyst. He just does it in the form of these sort of satirical tweets in the voice of Putin, right? But it's all mockery. It's the whole structure of his persona is based on mockery. The slogan Putin Huilo, which is used by Russians and Ukrainians, I don't know if it's used by Belarusians, but it literally means Putin is a dickhead. And you have to imagine giant crowds chant, somebody will shout Putin and people will, but the idea of reducing it to a kind of grade school obscenity taunt, is this just a Putin thing? Or is it like, I don't have the impression that people deal with Lukashenko, the Belarusian dictator, the same way. Do you think of this as a Kremlin thing or as a way of addressing authoritarian regimes more generally?
So Lukashenko has been called a cockroach during the most recent protest, massive protests 4 years ago. I think now, when the protests were gaining momentum in Belarus, it was a lot of fun and maybe jokes going around. It's not so much fun anymore, I would say, because we're sort of stuck in the crisis. Lukashenko has a hold on power de facto, whether we like it or not, and people like me are sort of ousted. So there's not so much jokes going around at this point. But what is popular though is a number of YouTubers or all this comedy shows on politics in the Belarusian media space that are also they're operating from exile, but they're trying to reach out to domestic audience despite the blockage of major international media and access to Western websites. Try to reach out to the Belarusian audience domestically to sort of cheer them up, and this content is quite popular.
But my sense of that there isn't a culture of mocking Lukashenko the way there is of Putin, that there's not, Lukashenko toilet paper, which, there's something, there hasn't been an effort to make him comical and idiotic, though he's clearly not very bright. That there just he hasn't been memified in the same way. Is that wrong? And that sort of among Belarusians there's a active culture of mockery, or is it just not the way people have engaged with him?
Well, I think there's definitely this mockery, as I said, in the comedy shows. You cannot print a toilet paper with his face. If you're in,
well, you can in Lithuania.
Yeah, right. You can do that. I think right now, I personally feel so much disgust. I don't even want to joke about him.
One thing that I think is kind of ironic is there's this antagonism towards intellectualism and actual analysis of policy things, which is what I'm assuming, because I apologize, I don't know that much, but I'm assuming that was what your crime essentially was because you were critical of the government. So you have these people who are being memified and spoken to in a language that they're encouraging to take away from critical analysis from people who are critically analyzing them. And it's a very odd duality to me. What did that feel like initially?
What exactly?
When you're trying to put content out especially to the audiences, the domestic audiences, yeah. I imagine it's kind of hard to get there just the content itself. So the memification of these individuals is like a quick snippet that can be circulated broadly. So when you're going and trying to produce more long form content, how challenging is that?
So I did observe exactly that when, let's say, looking for funding for my research, and I could definitely see that the donors' priorities are sometimes to fund this quick sort of memes that would quickly reach the Belarusian audience, and in a way maybe try to educate them, or on this like one-on-one type of level of political developments, but not necessarily dive into the complexities of like Belarusian foreign policy, for example. So that's definitely a challenge for me as a researcher. But in a way, I understand why people who fund the programs or try to support the information space or independent media, like when they rely, or let's say the opposition media, they have different metrics of success. So that's where I understand them, but I also think that you cannot just mock someone indefinitely without producing meaningful solutions. So that's a drawback.
Kate has to drop off, so you have a last question. Have at it.
Yeah, I think that this is like I'm sorry that I can't stay longer, but it is like, the middle of the night here. But I just like, Katie, thank you for everything that you're doing. You're, as Ben would say, a great American. I get to say it before he does because like it's not the sign off yet.
I've never said somebody was a great Belarusian before. I've never had the occasion.
True. You can, and then this is your moment. But I was just gonna say, like, when I guess my question for you is like, having lived where you've lived and experienced what you've experienced in the last couple of years that you've been in the US, from a free speech perspective, do you feel like, I guess, like a little bit like, do Americans take it for granted, like the amount of free speech they have? Or do you feel like every kind of like moment of free speech kind of kerfuffle and protest is like part of defending that free speech? I guess kind of like, how are your priors of being in Eastern Europe kind of like informing like your speech world right now?
I am curious observing how some Americans use the freedoms they have in a very creative way, and let's say,
Say more.
Saying that Kamala Harris is like a communist, or that the choices between like being attacked by evil communists.
Wait, why is that weird? Why is it weird that they're no, I'm serious. Why is it weird? I mean this incredibly, incredibly seriously. Like, why is like calling Kamala Harris like a communist? I mean, like, that actually seems different than a free speech thing. That just seems like in our world, communist is bad. And so like, like they're calling her a bad thing. And would you not be allowed to call a member of the opposition party a bad thing? Or would you not be allowed to call them a communist? Or would you just not call them a communist because communist is
I was
A+?
just saying that I doubt that people who say that they know what communism is about, but it just seems like a bad thing to them. I was once on the like a stream when Prigozhin was wandering around and when he was still alive. There was a there's some guy who's very loyal and have millions of followers on Twitter, and he's endorsing Elon Musk, and he invited me to speak to sort of try to make sense of that mutiny. And it was, and then I saw that Elon Musk's Twitter retweeted our stream. That was like 6 million views, and that seemed like, in one hand, like I had really complex reactions, because I thought like, wow, we're reaching a big audience, and I also know that the host was not trying to interrupt me or twist my words. But at the same time, when I see like what Musk is like, what his agenda is, and probably this particular blogger is not too like independent, like I'm still trying to make sense of it again, like of the American info space.
Yeah, so let's talk about that.
But we're gonna leave it there for me. Love to all of you. Katie, I hope we get to interact again sometime. You are fantastic, and it's such an honor to meet you. Genevieve, I love you. It's great to see you. Ben, you're just okay. I miss you
I
guys.
accept the hierarchy.
Okay, I love you. See you soon. Bye.
So let's talk about that, because I think a lot of Americans also find our information space completely cacophonous and hard to make sense of. And I can't imagine, frankly, approaching it as a foreigner, or somebody who is coming from an absence of a free speech tradition. So walk me through that. You show up in the United States for the first time. You're obviously exposed to the US information ecosystem in all the European countries that you operate in, because you're interacting with the world. How is it different when you're here?
So before I came to the US, I worked with the International Republican Institute, which was founded by John McCain. And when my first surprise was to learn, when I came to the US, to learn the divisions and different groups inside the Republican Party. And I figured that mentioning the very fact, like, to Americans who are maybe not really well versed in the Eastern European politics, for them say like, "Oh, actually, I worked for IRI," and they were looking at me so weird.
So yeah, so just for those who do not understand what IRI is, in the domestic U.S. context, IRI is affiliated with the Republican Party. It is the counterpart of NDI, of which my wife is, full disclosure, the president, which is affiliated with the Democratic Party. They both do the same thing, which is overseas democracy promotion. They work together extremely closely. And there is absolutely nothing disreputable about IRI, which is a wonderful organization and does wonderful work all over the world, but especially in Eastern Europe, where John McCain, about which McCain and others in the now defunct democracy wing of the Republican Party had very strong feelings. And so IRI does like great work in Ukraine. It does great work all over the place. And so, yeah, you get this kind of whiplash where, like, in the community, if you say you work for IRI, that's like, oh, that's a serious thing that you're doing, work with IRI in Belarus. And then you come to the United States and you say you work with IRI, and it's like saying I voted for Trump.
And to also add some context about IRI work in Belarus, they were sort of developing capacity and sometimes provide some material support to opposition groups and certain civil society actors. And again, if you mention this to the Americans, they was like, "Oh, so we're giving money to their political groups? Like, how messed up is that?" And you leave what is left sort of behind the scenes is that there were no sources of, even like, you cannot legally like crowdfund money for any alternative political force in Belarus if you're not affiliated with Lukashenko. So yeah, you could not literally, sometimes, like in the very extreme cases, people have to smuggle like cash through the border to finance some, I don't know, like
position
some
papers or
yeah exactly,
wild.
or some advocacy campaign.
So talk to us about what you're doing now that you're here. You have some, you were for a long time, about a year here, but not allowed to work because you didn't have a work permit. That has been fixed. So what are you looking to do? What are your plans?
Well, I'm looking for a job, and I'm working on my podcast, and I'm about like with Darth, and about to launch another one, which I don't know we shall or shall not talk about at this
Well,
point.
you can talk about it if you want. This
Yeah.
is a
So
so wait, but before we do,
yeah. Okay.
what is tell us where we can find people where they can find the podcast with Darth, so that
Yeah, so the podcast with Darth is called In the Bunker with Darth, and we are on YouTube, and you can find us on Apple and Spotify. We just dropped the recent episode is when with the General Ben Hodges, where we talked about the Kursk little counteroffensive and fun facts about the Russian army. And Darth asked Ben if like what rank he would give General Gerasimov, like if he was under his command.
and what
So
was
that
the answer?
Yeah.
that the guy should be imprisoned.
Okay, so what can you tell us about your new project?
So the new project, like it's about to materialize, and I want to gather the research that is being produced in DC and talk to the think tankers who produce this research. And like people are usually one thing people are usually excited to do is to share what the hell they were writing, why it makes sense to them, what are the methods. Usually, you can see even like the expression of the face of this like policy expert like lighten up. It's like, oh yeah, of course I'm happy to talk. So I think that's like a good niche, and it also would be interesting for me to get a better sense of what kind of like foreign policy solutions are being sort of generated here in DC. Talk to sort of American colleagues here. So we're about to launch that. I think we'll be on Substack.
So you will. So let me get this straight. So this is a podcast about foreign policy research products coming out of U.S. think tanks in Washington.
Yes, exactly.
And it will consist principally of interviews with scholars, or will it be you like dissecting, what Fred Kagan has to say and explaining why he's wrong? Like, how much of this is you talking about the research, and how much of this is you interviewing scholars about the work they're producing?
I think I'm very like relatively nice person speaking in a soft voice, so I think I would rather listen to the interlocutor and make some nerdy notes,
Just checking.
And then I might come up with some after like some summaries.
I see. So the goal isn't like to sort of shred people's work and sort of be like the Dorothy Parker of foreign policy. Like, it's not to be a critic; it's to be an interviewer.
I don't think this approach works at all, be it with toddlers or adult researchers. So
They're similar,
constructive dialogue, rather.
Excellent.
Are you looking for any particular trends when you're going through this, or are you just more to see what's coming out?
So it should be research. I mean, based on like there should be some methodology behind it. And then foreign policy, and I think ideally it would be great to touch on every aspect of sort of international relations, like security, and I mean to cover like every region.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean that's ideally we'll see how it materializes.
That's so exciting.
So I want to ask you about another feature of your career, which we've talked about a little bit privately, but I want to surface a little bit, because you're, among other things, you are a Belarusian lawyer. And I want to understand what it means to be a lawyer in a society without the rule of law. All these societies, all these authoritarian regimes, China, Russia, at the extreme end, Nazi Germany, had lawyers, but they don't have, you know, they don't have law that means anything. And so, what is the function of a lawyer in a lawless society?
To serve the interests of the regime. That's literally what they teach you in the law school. Like if you read behind the lines.
So
And
walk us through that. How do they communicate that? And what do you, as a lawyer in Belarus, what do you do?
okay, I worked as a lawyer in Belarus for like roughly a year before I defected to the other side, like before I joined IRI. So it's not that I worked hell a lot there. You know what was funny is that my parents told me like you should go to law school and you should study. I always wanted to do international relations, but they said like, oh, it's not practical. But study Belarusian law because you will always have a job. Like you can work like in a law firm, do like corporate law. International relations or international law is something very abstract. You won't find any like sort of actual like you won't build a good career out of it. So several years after, here we are, where I'm doing like quite fine with my sort of a career pivot towards IR. And then my friends from law school who studied Belarusian law, who founded their own law, like law firms or otherwise practice law, many of them lost licenses, and some of them who are still in Belarus, well, uh, they lost licenses even if they were not directly involved into some opposition activities. But apparently, like they were told by some folks at Ministry of Justice somewhere, like in the hallway, like, yeah, we're revoking the license because we think that you're not politically reliable. And I have a friend who had to transition to a completely different job. Like she decided to stay in Belarus and she obtained a different education now
Hmm.
to sort of sustain herself. And then many of us are abroad and trying to adjust, like getting different degrees or sort of transition into different careers. So that's like that played out in a very interesting way, I would say.
But for the lawyer to have a function, right? Because if you have a completely, I don't think North Korea has lawyers or Tajikistan, right? Maybe it does, but but to have a society with lawyers, the law has to mean something, right? Because somebody would have to have need of a lawyer in order to get something done. And so I guess my question is, who needs a lawyer in Belarus in order to do what? What's the day-to-day function when your parents said you'll always have a job because corporations need lawyers in Belarus? What what does that mean? Like, what do they need lawyers for?
Yeah, that's a good point. Uh, well, for sort of doing business or I guess you still need someone with a basic understanding of the rules.
So there are rules.
Like
So
contract work, or is it
yeah, for the
more?
contract work. But you know what I want to highlight? So I mean, in political cases, like that's a complete mockery. Like the role of the judge or the police or the prosecutor. What is funny is that, like in my case, there were 20 scholars in the same criminal case, and we all had
And to
like
be clear,
our
for those who don't know, the criminal case was a group of think tank scholars and who were accused of trying to overthrow the regime and the election by doing think tank work.
yeah.
But did that group have a lawyer?
So, like none of us got any access to criminal case materials, even though we tried to reach out the court, the prosecutor's office, and we each of us were assigned a pro bono lawyer by state. None of those lawyers contacted or responded to our attempt to communicate with them.
Wow.
And here comes the fun part. So, in this orchestrated case, there were 3 hearings. What was it about? That I don't know. Because like if this all like if you know what's the outcome, you don't even, why bother reading out loud the materials or having 3 hearings? And now we submitted an appeal, or some of, I think, my colleagues submitted an appeal. There would be an appeal hearing scheduled. So again, what is this about? Like that's a good question. Like why even waste resources?
So, but I want to come back to the situation of your trial. But are you saying for sort of like a day-to-day transaction, you have a business, I want to buy it, that there's enough rule of law that we would both have lawyers in that transaction, and that there's enough sense of the rules that for if it's completely non-political and you don't need to pay somebody a bribe, and then there are systems that work according to rules and lawyers have a role in that, and it's kind of only in the political echelon that it becomes a total mockery? Or is it a mockery in the routine transaction sense too?
Well, you mentioned the bribe. So, I mean, there is bribery and there are cases. I mean, I knew even when I was interning at the court back in the days, you could see how, like, you could know who's going to win based on, let's say, if that's even, I don't know, a matter of inheritance, like the case about inheritance, and then um, the person on one side happens to be the MP at the parliament, who was, of course, like never elected but rather appointed there de facto. And the other person is just like an ordinary citizen, so you could kind of guess like whose favor who will win the case, and then. Well, I would assume like you still need a lawyer, like when you're filing your tax application or like tax file, and you need someone to explain what's what. Um, but again, I actually, like I haven't been in the country for 4 years, and I haven't practiced law for like a long time. So like, don't quote me on that. I cannot tell you like what the lawyers are still useful
What
for.
they're doing.
Yeah.
So I kind of want to piggyback on 2 things here. First is the theatrical element of the trial and the appeal process. So essentially, there's no true appellate process. It's just theater so that they can say there was an appellate process,
Yeah.
or a crime, or a criminal process. But
Yeah.
what I kind of have a question about is how many lawyers go into politics? Because if you have so many individuals whose ultimate client is the state, but not really the state, it's the politicians that represent the state, do you find that a lot of people who go to law school kind of shuttle into politics?
So one way sort of to build a career in Belarus is like to work within the state structure, and a bunch of my classmates did become prosecutors, judges. And then I'm thinking about the corporate world. Well, I wonder. Oh, here comes the cat, but you won't see him. Sorry. So I would say like still politics. Like even if you think that politics would not touch you, like it would, and like there are quite a few criminal lawyers who were defending their clients in politically motivated cases, and they ended up behind the bars themselves.
Okay.
Or lost their licenses. And another example is maybe I was recently leading the sort of advocacy campaign on drug policy liberalization in Belarus to sort of bring more awareness of the like inhumane treatment of people with addictions, and how interestingly enough, like the drug laws are like pretty much like draconian laws related to any nonviolent drug use in Belarus.
Could
And
you give an
those people,
example of
yeah,
like
so like
what?
smoking marijuana, like a minor would go to a party, smoke marijuana, end up in prison for 5 years, and in those like any drug related case, there was no, like once the police or the prosecutor figure out like, oh, this is about drugs, and they again like they would think like, oh, marijuana is also like bad enough, not even like anything like stronger. They would not look at the evidence, and so does, or sometimes they would fabricate it. And that's how minors end up with like this horrible sentences for 12 years in prisons. And I still wonder by this day, is there any economic rationale for the state, because those folks end up as free labor in prisons? So could this be a rationale or not? And me and like a team of researchers and like lawyers who actually represented clients in these cases, we've produced some policy papers. And it was hard for me to find a author, an expert, be it a medical practitioner or a lawyer, who would be still based in Belarus and willing to talk to us. And we only had like one author, like all others were working from abroad, and some of them like lost their licenses by this time. Yeah, so that's the, I don't know, that's the everyday context you should I should like take in account.
I have one more question. If you lose your license, can you appeal it?
Oh, like if you lose it and like I guess you would still figure out what's the rationale. Is this because of some like technical formalities? But if it's someone like, there are some informal lists of I guess maybe like KGB folks or even like Ministry of Justice, when they decide that you're politically unreliable,
Okay.
then I don't think you have your chances.
So I want to raise one other issue before we wrap up, which is the war on the Belarusian language. For those who are not Slavic language knowledgeable, Belarusian is actually its own language, closely related to kind of Western Ukrainian, probably closer, I think, to Polish than to Russian. Is that right?
Yeah.
And I am aware of many countries that have sort of declared war on minority languages, Russia, China being principal examples. But Belarus is really weird in having declared war on its own language. And I'm interested in why that is, that, you know, you're trying to run a country and it has a proud tradition of its own language, its own political history, its own, and you're as a leader over a long period of time very actively discouraging the use of the country's language that in fact bears the name of the country itself. How should we understand, and that, by the way, the leader can't really speak, as best as I can tell.
Sometimes he just reads on paper with a very strong accent, you know.
Yeah. So what?
Definitely not fluent.
And I mean, that's like easy to make fun of. At the beginning of the war, Zelensky was not a great speaker of Ukrainian either. He's native Russian speaking, as are many Ukrainians. So I mean, I don't mean to make fun of his lack of proficiency in the Belarusian language, but it's weird to run a country that you then kind of make war on the language of. And so what is the history of that, and why does the president of Belarus hate the Belarusian language?
So short answer, like why he hates it is because the folks who were in the opposition to him in the early days of his presidency were what you would call like right-wing Belarusian conservative forces who were standing for giving the Belarusian language the status of the official language. And I think it, in a way, like maybe that's his personal trauma that he hates those folks in the opposition. But the big elephant in the room is also that the Russians don't like it. And I think for Russians, it's crucial to see like, oh, Ukraine is shifting away. We're losing everyone else in the neighborhood, every other country. But then the Belarusians are our buddies, so to say. We have the Union State integration project with them. We cannot lose them. And then this process of Russification is not new. That's something what Catherine, who was not so great, introduced the Russification policies in the late 18th century. And then there were even like during the Soviet times, it was the same stuff. You could barely study Belarusian language in school or publish a book in school. So the policies we have now, they're not new. It's just almost like a continuation of the past 300 years.
It's true, although it's a continuation at the hands of, you know, like that's a kind of novelty, I think. So do people like, you know, Ukrainian is spoken by a very large number of people. My impression is that Belarusian is more threatened at this point. Does it still have a lot of active speakers?
So I would not be personally brave enough today in Belarus, like if I was still living in Belarus, to speak Belarusian in the street, or let alone like to go to the, let's say, file your taxes, go to any sort of authority, because it immediately indicates it's now sort of there's this association that if you speak Belarusian, you're anti-Lukashenko and you're in the opposition. Belarusians, political prisoners who speak Belarusian, they're treated much more like badly than other prisoners. But like what I did when I was lived in Belarus, like first it was not as bad, but still you could feel that like again, like if you speak Belarusian, you attract unwanted attention from the police in any case. And my approach, I guess, would be like I would order a coffee in Russian, but if I meet with a friend who would speak Belarusian among ourselves. And Belarusian language is very active now in the diasporas and in the media space, independent media space, but not, like it's not a good idea to use it. Let's say if you cross the border and spoke to Belarusian border guard, don't do that.
So I cannot name another country where it is unsafe to speak that country's language, official language, on the streets of that country. That is just like not North Korea, you know, not Turkmenistan. I just can't think of another example of that where you know, where the country is really profoundly at war with its own independent culture. And some of that, I agree, is, you know, a creature of the fact that Lukashenko does kind of still want to inherit the entire Russian Empire. He sort of thinks of himself as like the Union State. If Russia and Belarus kind of merge, maybe he can get Russia too.
It really smacks of imperialism that it became a normative signal that you're of the opposition. That's crazy.
All right. In the spirit of the new regime, speaking of the authoritarian Dog Shirt Daily, which is at war with the official language of Dog Shirt Day, I don't know what that means. We are wrapping up on time, which means it'll be 1 minute. Katie, you are a great American and a great Belarusian. Genevieve Della Fera, it is so lovely to see your face. Look, we're going to be back. We're not going to be back tomorrow because there's a debate, you may have noticed. We are going to be back on Wednesday with the estimable Tyler McBrien of my managing editor at Lawfare, and a wonderful guy. And we are going to unpack the debate as two people with no expertise in American politics or in debate. And it's going to be great. We're gonna talk about it, and that's going to be at 6 o'clock on Wednesday. Until then, look, we're not allowed to have fun anymore, but we are allowed to wear shoebill shirts. And the shoebill, remember, just as Belarus is the only country in the world at war with its own language, the shoebill is the only bird in the world that both cannot make a sound. It has no voice, but it does smack its beak together in a fashion that makes it sound like a machine gun. And if you've never done a check of shoebill machine gun call videos, they are awesome. Also, the shoebill is the origin story for buckbeak, the hippogriff, which bows, if you want to approach it, you have to bow to it. That's true of a shoebill. Do not approach a shoebill without bowing to it first. It's a weird ass bird.
Really?
And yes. No, it's an awesome animal. We're going to leave it there. See you next time.